Hi folks, thanks for joining us today. Craig here. We're just going to let people join as is kind of the protocol on these things. So we're getting over 150 right now, which is great. So we'll probably start about 1 minute past one, just so everybody's had a chance to jump in. But good to have you. Looking forward to sharing some of this thought leadership with you today on a lovely rainy Auckland day in New Zealand. Winter is truly here. And we've still got a water shortage after this week's rain. I can't believe it, but apparently that's true. All right, let's just have a look and see how we're going on numbers. Great, getting close to 200. Good crowd building, which is great. We'll just give people a little bit more time and then we'll kick off. All right, still building. But look, we are a little bit past one now, so we'll kick off. And welcome to our webinar on emerging from COVID-19 and New Zealand's journey. And so I'm Craig Irwin, I'm the Managing Director of IRI for New Zealand and Hong Kong. And alongside me is Sam Furso, our Insights Director for New Zealand. Just a couple of housekeeping things to kick us off. We're planning to present to 35-40 minutes, probably closer to 40 minutes, and then allow time at the end for Q&A. There is a Q&A button, so you can jump in there and post your questions as the webinar rolls on. And look, if there's some we can answer during the webinar, we will, but we will tackle those at the end. Also joining us is Paul Hines, the Managing Director of IRI Asia Pacific. So thanks, Paul, for coming on board. He's going to wrap up at the end and lead the Q&A. So thanks for doing that. Also, more importantly, we are videoing this, so important that you know that, so we can share it with you later. But also we will share the document we're presenting today, save you having to take copious notes and scramble for it later, so you can hopefully sit back and enjoy the discussion we're going to generate. Now, our audience today is slightly more global in nature than we're normally used to presenting to because of the topic and how unique New Zealand's been in its management of COVID. So given that, we are going to go through some of the detail of the stages we've been through in lockdown and some of the impacts of that. So for our New Zealand partners, you might have seen some of these slides before. We'll move through them pretty quickly, but it does help to give a bit of context. More importantly though, we will then get on to the back part of the presentation and we'll blend that data with our own opinions and insights that we have to help shape, your thoughts on what are the outcomes of COVID for suppliers and retailers in the New Zealand market, and what might we expect macro trends to evolve and emerge, and how might you respond to those. So there's definitely some nuggets of gold at the end to help you think about how your business might need to respond to what's happened. But really what we're trying to do today is give you a holistic view of the journey to date. We are not over COVID in any way, shape or form. We still have COVID in New Zealand, albeit coming from Kiwis returning home on flights from overseas. But it's a nice chance to pause and have a look at everything that's happened and bring this story together. So let me kick off and then I'll pass over to Sam. I'll just get the slide moving, slick as can be as always. Now, I think the first thing to mention is there's been a lot of talk about how New Zealand's beaten COVID to the point it has. The team of 5 million, our lucky isolation down in the South Pacific, miles from anywhere, a border that's pretty easy to close. But it's also worth remembering that it's not just pure luck and also some good policy. Policy has had a pretty big impact. Our biggest city, Auckland, actually has a higher population density than cities like Melbourne or Sydney. And in fact, our land mass is as big as countries like Ireland and Japan. So, the stages we've taken through lockdown to get on top of this virus have been a combination of the benefits of our borders, but also the policies we've taken and how New Zealand's collectively work together to tackle this issue. So let me pass over to Sam, who can take you through how that journey evolved.
Great, so let's take a look at how New Zealand tackled COVID and also the recovery that we did experience. So Kiwis, we're a pretty compliant bunch, and we have a real high trust in our leadership. And our leadership was really Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, who's on the screen as you can see now, our Director General of Health. And of course, the very popular Jacinda Ardern, our Prime Minister, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Now, they took these daily briefings where the New Zealand nation stopped what they were doing at 1 p.m. every day during the height of our crisis to listen as to what we needed to do next. And when we looked at our kind of approach, is that we started with this leveled system really early on, and Jacinda Ardern announced this. And if we just look at what those levels looked like in New Zealand, level 4 was extremely strict. All you could do was go to the grocery store, the petrol station, or the pharmacy, or if you needed to go to hospital, use public transport. So it was only those essential services. Other than that, we had to stay home. If we moved then on to level 3, this was pretty much level 4, but with takeaways. So not that much different, and in fact, still very strict on a world stage. Moving into level 2, however, we saw a lot of more freedoms come through. Kids went back to school, we all went back to work, and we could travel domestically. But there were some distancing restrictions still in place. It was only in level 1 in which all those restrictions locally were lifted and we were able to travel domestically. We're just not allowed to travel overseas. So how did this kind of look? Well, on the 28th of February, we had our first case in New Zealand. 2 weeks later, we started introducing some border controls. And then a few days after that, we went into strict border controls. So only New Zealand citizens could come back into our country. At this same time, that tiered system that I mentioned was also introduced. So then we went into level 4 just 5 days later, and level 4 lasted for just over a month. And what we can safely say right now is that we have been in level 1 for, as of today, July 9th, we have been in level 1 since the 9th of June. So 1 full month, pretty good day. But if we just backtrack a little bit, in March, WHO kind of announced this global pandemic, and they were concerned that countries just weren't taking it seriously enough. But if we look at what's happened in New Zealand, is that we went into lockdown just 2 weeks later. And level 4 saw us have one of the strictest levels of lockdown around the world. And in fact, the strictest level in the OECD. The kind of theme that we went with, or Jacinda did, was we went hard and we went early. And the whole principle was if we put in strict measures up front, kind of moving towards elimination, this would allow us to have an early and fast exit. And it pretty much has. Now we have the lowest level of restrictions in the OECD. So what did that mean? Well, we rose and fell really quickly. And what did that mean? Well, it meant that we flattened that curve super quick. And in fact, today we have only 23 cases, all of which are in managed quarantine. And I guess that managed quarantine is where we're pretty concerned, right? Because our borders are our biggest threat because we're an island nation. And just yesterday, we had someone escape from a hotel in our Auckland city and go down to a grocery store and wander around, and he has been labeled as COVID positive. So of course, there's a lot of anxiety in our country. But as I mentioned, in March, our borders did close. And you can see on this chart here that those arrivals just dropped completely over April and May. Now, if we look at June, we can see that slight uptick as Kiwis want to repatriate home. And in fact, we're seeing more Kiwis want to come home because of our safe haven status. But as more people arrive home, of course, we have concerns around those increased number of cases that are coming through. So what's great is that we can say that New Zealand is one of the freest places on the planet. It's just one of a handful of countries, and if I've got a list here, so Burundi, Taiwan, Timor, Belarus, and Nicaragua all have the same level of restrictions as we do. So this next section is going to take you through how New Zealand has reacted moving through each of the levels. So like we've seen around the rest of the world before lockdown, we saw this chaos, this panic-induced buying, empty shelves, no bread, no flour, no disinfectants. And, you know, this was just an absolute chaos in our supermarkets. And Countdown, which is one of our major retail banners, they actually said that in one day, they sold more than 10 million meals to Kiwis. So remembering what Craig said is that we only have 5 million Kiwis, and remembering that it's just the Countdown banner. So just absolute acceleration of sales. But as we started to enter into the level 4, we saw rapidly movement reduce. In fact, it looks almost like an apocalyptic zombie movie. Motorways were empty, streets were empty. We were only allowed out for essential trips. And what's funny is those workers who were essential workers quite often were being stopped by the police along their journeys to make sure that they weren't being naughty. But as we moved into level 3, as I mentioned, it's essentially level 4, but with some takeaways. It was a huge relief for all of us. I mean, I was fed up of, you know, making breakfast, lunch and dinner every single day for over a month. I just couldn't face the kitchen anymore. So I was super happy. I think the first week I ended up having lunch and dinner out every single, well, not out, in, but buying out, every single lunch and dinner meal. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, look, I promised I wasn't going to be one of these people queuing for takeaways, but where did I find myself on that first night? You could buy takeaways outside the local pizza restaurant, queuing for pizza for my boys who were desperate to have anything but home cooking. Pretty tragic.
How long did you wait?
I think it was about an hour. That should have been 15 minutes.
Yeah. So, and actually on that point, so the queues at some of the McDonald's were 2.5 hours, and that was at 2 a.m. the first day we went into level 3. So absolutely mental. And also we did see this pent up demand as basically in the first week of level 3, we sold 5 weeks worth of takeaways. So it kind of almost was like COVID didn't happen for that industry. But as we ended up into level 2, it was actually much more like normality. So each activity that we were able to do was greeted with excitement and a bit of, you know, like anticipation because of the freedoms. You could go down to the cafe and have some poached eggs or a chai latte. But the other thing that was really critical was getting your hair cut. And we were able to get our haircuts at midnight on the first day of level 2, and that was met with queues. Craig, when did you get your haircut? Well,
I didn't do it on the first day, and I was desperately holding out. But about day 3, after we could go to the barber, I do remember queuing with about 60 others to get my cut. It was frightening, but you know, we were desperate.
Desperate times. The other thing that was a welcome kind of entry for level 2 was the fact that all those parents that were homeschooling their kids as well as working got a sigh of relief because schools did open as well. Now, level 1 is super exciting. This is where not many other countries are at this point in time. We had the first ever crowd-oriented sports competition. And of course, as Kiwis, it was rugby. We are known for our rugby. And also this week, we did hold our first arena concert that was sold out as well. So all of these different types of things are really, everything that we're able to do has a sense of euphoria, but also pride about what we've actually been able to achieve. If we just look at Google mobility data, which everyone's been looking at around the world, level 4 saw that really drop off quite rapidly. But actually, as we've come through level 1, it's steadily returning. But obviously different kind of results for different areas. What we did see in the first week of level 1, that traffic was up to about 90% of normal levels. Streets were about up to 80%, so people on streets. And also workplaces were generally returning back to normal. The other thing is that, as you can see, our skies filled up with planes again. But what's being predicted is that we're only going to be at 80% of domestic travel levels by the end of the year. But it is good that these planes are in the skies again, and it does reflect this desire to get away from home. If I'm thinking about myself, I'd be probably in Tokyo in a couple of weeks at the Olympics, not participating, but watching. And obviously that has been moved out a year. So instead I'm opting to have a staycation down in the lovely Queenstown. Are you doing any trips?
Yeah, I might be having a coffee with you down there. I'm like a lot of Kiwis and embracing the staycation, which is great to see, great for our local economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the July holidays, which we're in, it's the second biggest holiday season of the year, and we're really hoping that that will boost up that domestic economy. But what's really apparent, as I've kind of taken you through this section, is that we're still surprised at how much celebration and kind of happiness that there is. Even just coming back to work a couple of weeks ago, it was exciting to see all of our work colleagues again. So there's those many moments that are giving us just a touch of joy that are opportunities for companies to really tap into. And this is really important as we enter our imminent recession, which I guess leads me really nicely onto you, Craig.
Thanks. I'll be the bearer of good news. So let's jump in now. Thanks for the quick sprint through the journey we've been on in the lockdown modes and how we've enjoyed coming out of it. Let's have a look now at what's happening in the economy, and then we'll do a much deeper dive into the FMCG sector and how that's playing out. Now, we're not economic forecasters or anything like that, but it's actually really interesting to have a look at the stats and then see how they marry up with consumer behaviour and purchase behaviour. So let's have a look. No surprises, most New Zealanders will be aware that we've reported a 1.6% drop in GDP for the March quarter. Now, it's not surprising because effectively what COVID has been is two crises in one. We've had a health crisis and we've also had an economic crisis. So again, not surprising if you look back in time to the GFC, the global financial crisis, 2007, 2010, this 1.6% drop in Q1, which is only 1 week of lockdown for us, only 1 week, is deeper than we ever went in the GFC. What you can also see is that the forecast for Q2 is to be pretty abysmal, and that's where we're going to feel the full brunt of being in lockdown for a long period. You know, two banks in New Zealand, fairly close in their estimates, between 17 and 19% decline for Q2 GDP. And on the right, you can see how various industries, so service industries, things like food service, restaurants, bars, cafes, down about 1.1. Good producing industries, so this is manufacturing, construction, no surprising, they were completely shut down, so they took the brunt. And then primary industries, forestry, farming, things like that, probably the worst of the least worst of those industries. Most of us in New Zealand will know we have a very strong tourism-based economy. Now, we've got quite a diverse economy, but tourism and exports are the dominant parts of our economy. So with our borders still closed for tourists, that is going to have a continued impact on the economic recovery in New Zealand. And then there's the whole domino effect from the borders being closed and tourism not turning up. Obviously, hotels, stay nights, Airbnb, that sort of thing, bars, restaurants, but tourist venues and locations around the country still hit pretty hard. So it's awesome that Kiwis like us are embracing our staycation at home, but it's not going to be enough to help the swift recovery for that industry. Another part of that industry is international education, which is becoming a big part of our education system and funding in New Zealand. And obviously international students still haven't been allowed to return, and they bring quite a lot of economic stimulus as well. So we haven't seen that return. We look at unemployment. Actually, right now, it's not too bad. easy for me to say in a job. There's obviously been impacts out there for people who are now unemployed or on reduced hours, but that is predicted to get significantly worse come September when the extension of the wage subsidy finishes, and a number of businesses will be looking at how they can ultimately survive without any support. So at the moment, around about 6.3, up from 4.9 pre-COVID, and forecast to climb as high as 9%. So there is more pain to come. I think we're in a bit of a celebration mode at the moment, but obviously a lot of businesses figuring out how they're going to survive. We are seeing some growth in job seeker numbers. So you can see that the little bounce in April from March, and you can also see the Seek advertisement index starting to have a little bit of a pickup. I guess the balance to that is we've actually seen employee earnings drop 12%. So, obviously there's that from people who have been laid off temporarily, and a smaller percentage who have been permanently laid off. So while there's a bit of bounce, a lot of people have got a lot less to spend in their back pocket, and you'll sense that as we go through the presentation. That's a big theme for us. That's going to have a real impact on consumer purchasing behaviour and consumer purchasing decisions. But again, there are little signs of positive news. You can see here consumer spending paymark data showing that actually for the week of the 5th of July, we're actually 2% up versus the same week last year. A very small data set, so we've got to be careful to claim any sort of victory off the back of that. But you can see that curve has rebounded pretty quickly from level 4 and level 3 lockdown, and we're now tracking to similar expenditure levels as last year. I suppose the graph on the right is pretty telling in that there's a whole period where we're underwater versus the same period last year, and unlikely we'll ever recover that expenditure, which means the year is going to be pretty ugly. Further, if you look at the research we've been doing at IRI, you can see a good chunk of Kiwis actually aren't expecting their expenditure to return to normal levels. Only 19–20% of those are saying, yeah, I'll keep spending as I did pre-COVID. So again, a bit of conservatism, as you'd expect, creeping into our expenditure. We are generally a fairly positive bunch, and you can see that is now starting to reflect in the Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index, bounced back up to 104.5. So in positive territory after being in negative territory, which is not surprising in April. Kiwis are not naive. They know the impact will be more than 12 months. Almost 2/3 are saying that. And the majority are super concerned about the economy. But definitely that move to level 1 has brought a positive mindset to Kiwis, and we are feeling excited that we can go out, reconnect, go about our daily lives, go to our sports events and our bars and pubs and enjoy each other's company. Not quite so for the business community, and you can see the business community has definitely rebounded from the low in March and April, and has come up a little bit of the pre-COVID era, but still in negative territory. That will also be influenced by the fact that it is election year, and in September we do have an election, and business confidence tends to dip before an election, but primarily to be driven by the fact that businesses are concerned about how they're going to come through post-COVID. Then we have a look at the price indexes, consumer and food price indexes. Not surprisingly, we've seen inflation there. A lot of this would have been driven particularly around food as retailers, grocery retailers in particular, scrambled to keep stock on shelves. One of the mechanisms for doing that was actually to reduce promotional activity rather than fueling even more frenzied buying, which is an absolute fair strategy, while suppliers and manufacturers scrambled to get on top of their supply chains and respond to the inordinate demand for toilet paper and canned goods. We are seeing that return to somewhat normal levels, and you can see the average price per unit starting to slide back down. But obviously this hurts when we're feeling the effect on our back pocket, yet food prices are climbing. Again, this is unintentional. It's retailers having to respond in extraordinary times, and they are starting to get back on top of it. But what sort of behaviour has that driven from Kiwis? Well, maybe again, not so much surprising. You can see that pre-lockdown period, the third column of bars from the left, where you can see total growth was up 44% in expenditure and packaged grocery products, but you can see private label outstrip that quite significantly. We're a savvy lot, us Kiwis. We spend more than just about any other country on promotion, and this COVID experience just reinforced that behaviour. So it's driving that mindset. We need to be more savvy. As we're seeing with a lot of consumers around the world, there's this real trend towards savvy purchasing. So we can see how that's playing out in New Zealand, where private label share is now peaking around 14.4%, up from 13.8% in 2019. Now, we're still a long way off New Zealand, in New Zealand, the global benchmark, which is, around about, in the 20s and 30s for some markets. We're still a long way off that, but it really shows you that has had an impact, and it's been sustained right through to level 1. You can still see private label outstripping total and branded sales. So look, before I jump into some more in-depth analysis on FMCG, what's a couple of pages of summary here. How are consumers feeling in summary? Hey, they're concerned about the economy. Our research says that, and every indicator you see in the news and the market would suggest that. While we're excited to be in level 1, we know that this isn't over. We're feeling vulnerable and a little bit cautious, so there has been a lot of Kiwis who've lost their jobs or had income impacted, and so we're being more cautious in our spend. While we've had a little bit of a celebration bounce and gone out and met with our friends at the local restaurant to celebrate, we've been able to join them in company again. We are more cautious with our expenditure, and we will be more alert to pricing cues in stores. And if we look at it from a New Zealand Inc. Point of view for the economy, hey, we did a good job. We tackled COVID hard and early. We're not out of the blocks yet, but we're doing a good job. But we know that the economic impact is yet to be felt, and that's going to come in Q2 and Q3, where we see more signs of that. We are seeing some early signs of recovery, which is positive. But we're also watching our neighbour, Australia, and they've taken a more moderate approach, and their Q1 GDP was only down 0.3% versus New Zealand 1.6%. Obviously, there's been some recent news in Australia with the need to re-lock down Melbourne, which maybe is going to prove that the New Zealand strategy was the right one, but we're curious to see how that evolves. But let's transition now and drop down a little bit deeper into how the COVID levels has impacted on our FMCG environment. Let's first have a look at our channels. So you can see our key channels here: grocery in green, petrol and forecourt in light blue, routes, or what we see as the corner sort of mum and pop store in red, and pharmacy in dark blue. The big winner for sure has been grocery through the strict level 4 and level 3 lockdown. Grocery and some convenience were the only stores you could visit. So they've had a strong and sustained benefit. The corner stores have done reasonably well as New Zealanders chose to shop local and avoid coronavirus queues, I guess, at supermarkets. Pharmacy enjoyed a pre-COVID peak as people panicked buy and bought their vitamins and supplements to help protect their immunity. But as soon as lockdown hit, pharmacy was a difficult environment to shop in, and people had pantry filled. So pharmacy, you can see, is slowly coming back. But petrol and forecourt rebounded pretty quickly. As soon as we could get into our cars, you can see the petrol and forecourt numbers start to climb. Interestingly, because we locked down hard and early, you can see the index versus other global markets of our stockpiling was pretty much second to none. We went hard in stockpiling, causing a number of dramatic out of stocks and panic buying. But as soon as we settled into lockdown and then have come out the other end, you can see we've now returned to levels that are similar to what Italy and France are seeing, who are two countries who are also managing to release their restrictions on their consumers. Obviously, what we saw is growth is now starting to soften as we move through our levels. So, that 44, 42% growth pre-lockdown as we panic bought. Obviously, this is grocery. So grocery was the big winner through the lockdown. Level 4, still seeing extraordinary growth. And now we're at levels similar to the GFC period. Again, grocery growth prior to COVID has been in the 3 and 4%, so still enjoying elevated value growth particularly. If you split that down between food and non-food, you can see in pre-lockdown it was non-food dominant. Food obviously 40%, still massive growth, but non-food, paper products, sanitizers, those sorts of immune supporting products for sure. Obviously, as we moved into lockdown, I'd stockpiled all the toilet paper I needed, realized I wasn't probably going to be getting through that quite as quickly as I thought, and that the world wasn't going to run out. And so it was a real focus on keeping my pantry stocked, my refrigerator stocked, and my freezer stocked. If we look at some of the major segments or major departments in grocery, as we've talked about in a lot of the thought leadership we've done through the COVID period, cooking and baking was the real winner, and Sam's going to talk a lot more to this as it's a continued theme post our levels of lockdown, where we've all decided to become great bakers at home. It's really reignited our passion for cooking and baking. You can also see that the grocery area, which is your canned goods, baked beans, spaghetti, those sorts of things, enjoyed a pretty big peak pre-lockdown and have still sustained pretty well. But what's really interesting is the frozen department. The peak wasn't as big pre-lockdown, but has sustained good growth as we like to keep our freezers stocked with ready meals and things we can quickly prepare at home. And that'll also talk to a theme that Sam's going to spend a bit of time on, where we are not going out to restaurants as much as we're watching our pennies. So we do need to cook more at home. And if we look into some of the other departments, we can see the impact on personal care, hygiene type products, immune type products, and vitamins and supplements. We can see that stockpiling, and then people realizing that they've got plenty in their cupboards at home. And as we get into level 2 and level 1, people working through that volume they've got at home, not needing to repeat purchase. And obviously, as we talked about the pharmacy market, you can see, the pharmacy market is still recovering and people aren't needing to race out and purchase as much cold and flu products. One, they've stockpiled, but two, as you can see in this little chart overlay here, our flu season has been delayed. The yellow line there is this year's food season overlaid versus prior year flu seasons. Now, we haven't been socially connecting as much, so we haven't been transferring the usual bugs around. But we've also been more compliant in getting immunisations against the flu. And so the season is late and only just starting now. All right, I'm going to pass over to Sam and now start to bring some of those trends to life.
Great. So now we're just going to finish off by looking at 3 key emerging themes that we've seen really cement as we've entered into level 1. Whether it's seeing demand into these experiences that I've spoken about in previous webinars, as we're starting to look at our out-of-home experience and bringing that in-home, we're also much more concerned about looking after ourselves, but also our community. There's definitely a sense of we're all in this together. And of course, online e-commerce, like around the world, has experienced accelerated growth and businesses are having to adapt. And we're seeing new business models emerge here in New Zealand. Now, as a starting point, what we're seeing is that home is really becoming the central place for all of us. It's much more important than it was pre-COVID. Despite restaurants and cafes opening in level 3 and level 2, we are seeing that people are still cooking at home much more. According to a survey conducted by our Restaurant Association in level 1, they found actually that the foot traffic into hospitality was only around 70 to 80% of levels pre-COVID. And so what that means from a grocery perspective is that we're seeing elevated sales in the home restaurant. So what we're seeing is these three themes, which I like to call, so the first is around the master chef. So foodie ingredients are still experiencing double-digit growth. We've also got the global cuisine, so Asian foods, Mexican foods and the like, and also still up 17%. And then the last trend is what I like to call the fakeaways. So it's making takeaways, but at home. And as Craig has already mentioned, the elevated levels of frozen, and that certainly is being driven by this trend. So whether or not it's your frozen pizzas, your frozen fish and chips, or your frozen kind of burger patties, they are all experiencing great growth. And when we think about the role of our homes in our lives, businesses and individuals are seriously rethinking how they operate in a work environment. In fact, if I think about myself, my commute's around 12 hours a week. So even if I can halve that, I can be not only more productive at home, but also more productive in my work life as well. And as you can see on screen here, coffee's up 22% still. But of course, Kiwis are coffee snobs. And so it's all around the premium coffee beans that we're seeing that growth come from. But also through lockdown, Kiwis have missed out on the cafes that jazz up our own coffee. So coffee syrups are still up 44% in level 1. So when we're thinking about the home and its importance, if we think about the breakfast occasion, we now have more time to have breakfast because we're not rushing out. Or lunch, maybe we're not going out with our colleagues at work, we're having it at home. Or in fact, if we're thinking about our dinner, we can start dinner earlier. Maybe we'll even do some pre-prep at lunchtime. So how are we thinking about how our occasions are changing and those new need states which are going to be emerging and impacting us? When it comes to bringing those out-of-home experiences in-home as well, so hair, nail and beauty salons all opened in level 2. But it's not surprising that the home salon is still important. So hair colorants are up 11%. And what we see is that, okay, there's a whole heap of new buyers that have been forced to buy the hair box during lockdown and give it a go. I was one of them. But now what we're seeing is that the repurchasing has happened because we've still now got some grays that we have to cover up. And the box, it's convenient. I don't have to spend hours in the chair. I can just do it at home. But also it's so affordable. It's $20 versus $200. So it kind of makes sense. And if we think about what Craig's been talking about with the recession that's imminent, now is really the time that those affordable in-home solutions should be communicated, and make sure that you're communicating that they're professional grade as well. The other thing that we have seen, even pre-COVID, was this joy of missing out. So our home becoming much more important. And during COVID, that of course accelerated. And one of the areas I want to talk to, which Craig touched on, is this rekindled love of baking. Even in level 1, we're still seeing huge amounts of growth in this baking space. Cake needs, frozen pastry, still up almost 20. And even flour, which we had all thought we'd all stockpiled 20 kilos of flour at home, still experiencing 10% growth. And if we think about the importance of baking to the total store, it really is a huge basket builder. So how do you really start to inspire experimentation and leverage this trend? The last area is one that's close to my heart, and it's sitting at home, staring at the 4 walls that are white, not very inspiring, and thinking, oh, that could do with a picture. And so what we've seen in grocery is that homeware and hardware has actually had quite a huge amount of growth. And actually one of the biggest areas is picture hooks. But even beyond this, what we're seeing in New Zealand is the demand for tradies has accelerated, and the economic forecasters are really expecting this this boom in the DIY space. And in fact, the home furnishings and hardware stores are already experiencing some great uplifts. The other thing, we have been in a health crisis, and therefore self-care has become imminently more important. And what we saw during COVID, that 1/3 of us were improving their self-care habits. And as we've come into level 1, what we've seen is that people want to maintain these habits. In fact, our gyms are almost at 90% of pre-COVID capacity, which is pretty impressive. And because we're wanting to look after ourselves, one of the things that has come out to the forefront is protection, because we want to mitigate against getting things like COVID, against getting sick. So it's not surprising personal cleaners and house cleaners are still at pretty high numbers. The other area we've seen is around prevention. As we do want to mitigate the risk of getting COVID, we want to boost up our immune systems. Now, immune boosters were trending even before COVID, not only in New Zealand, but around the world. But as COVID hit, we've seen vitamin C be a complete global hit. And if we think about in New Zealand, kiwi fruit have had extremely high levels of demand internationally. Look, vitamins and minerals and dietary supplements are of course going to benefit from this trend, but it does go beyond that because immunity is going to become this all-day concern. And there's going to be other categories that start to get on the bandwagon, such as snacking. So if you've got immune boosting in your arsenal, it's definitely a time to get those claims on pack and in your messaging. And we anticipate that that's definitely going to be coming through. The other area which we've alluded to is obviously we're in a crisis at the moment and all of Kiwis are concerned both with COVID and the New Zealand economy. And what we do find during recessions is it does deteriorate people's mental wellness. So what we have seen is mood boosters, vitamins and minerals are up, but also those antidotes to reality, those small treats. And a great example is ice cream in double-digit growth. And as Craig said right at the beginning, we are in the height of winter. So that's pretty impressive. The other one, will there be a baby bump? Will we be entering Generation C over Christmas and summer? Well, according to both our pregnancy test kits and our ovulation testing kits, both in double-digit growth, we wouldn't be surprised. And I think if we're thinking about this, it could be transformative to categories, but also our nation as a whole. So let's have a look at those pregnancies in summer. If we just think about our communities a little bit more, there has been a real appetite here to support businesses in our local communities. And this has really been championed by New Zealand leaders, Jacinda Ardern, but also retailers. For example, New World, which is another one of our retail banners here in New Zealand, they had the whole month of June where they were really supporting or championing New Zealand local brands. We've also seen really this customer movement, which is important to rebuilding our economy. So local brands for you, it's really important to get into your shoppers' consideration sets. Make sure that your presence is known. And just kind of along those lines as well, if we just break down the manufacturers into different sizing groups, what we see is that small and extra small manufacturers here are experiencing double-digit growth, while if we look at the larger counterparts, they're not faring so well. In fact, they've taken up 0.6 percentage points of the total share. So we are looking at supporting those smaller players. Now, just wrapping up before I pass over to Craig, is that we've spoken about these three themes, or two of them so far. And one of the things I wanted to reflect on is just a brand that covers off these themes quite nicely. So Monday Hair Care, which is not just in New Zealand, I believe it's around the world, entered supermarkets a couple of days or a couple of weeks before we went into lockdown. Now, Nick Mowbray, he is a New Zealand entrepreneur. He's known for a company called Zuru, which is one of the biggest toy manufacturers in the world, if you've heard of him. And he's really been championing little Kiwi businesses and supporting Kiwi entrepreneurs, because he believes that that is the backbone to New Zealand and our economy. He's been disrupting what he calls stodgy supermarket categories, and Monday Hair Care is a great example of this. It's a brand that promises to bring the salon to you at very affordable prices. So a bottle is about $7 Kiwi dollars. It's about making luxury accessible to all. And they've really been amping up the whole self-care piece as well. I am a millennial and it's the millennial pink that I'm very attracted to. So I certainly, when I come across it, want to pop it into my shower. It's super cool. It's super on trend. It looks amazing. Central to the brand or all of the products that Zuru is releasing, it's all around getting influencers on board and their social media strategy. Digital marketing is central to them. And because of this, they're able to kind of pivot really quickly because their data, they engage in a lot of data decision making. So this is really an advantage in a world that is accelerating its use of online. And Craig's going to take you through why online is so important.
Great, thanks Sam. And we're just about there folks, and we'll get into questions shortly. But the last piece really is looking at the growth of online. Not surprising, and I'm sure if you're in New Zealand through lockdown, you heard the statistics on this, that the retailers were particularly struggling to keep up with demand of online and click and collect. So dramatic growth, as you can see here in groceries. While it's come back a little bit in May, it's only come back 13%. So really what we're seeing is a new baseline being set. And really what lockdown has taught us, a lot of us, is actually, I need to go online. I need to find a different way. I don't want to be in the queue. Let me have a go at online grocery shopping. In fact, you know, another industry, the banking industry, you know, Kiwis have converted a lot more to digital online banking. And so we're seeing banks now saying, you know what, I'm probably going to accelerate the number of branches I close because we've moved in a couple of months what would have normally taken us 2 to 3 years to move to. So quite big changes in online shopping. And here's some of the key stats around that. So Countdown has, you know, released their data saying, you know, massive online sales, massive growth in the week, 13 weeks to the 5th of April, and penetration is up near 8%. Sounds low, but it's actually you know, growing dramatically. And if again you look at that week of the 5th of April, it was up at 11%. So we're actually setting a new behaviour that actually Kiwis go, actually I had to try that. Actually, it worked really quite well, and now it's part of my routine when I need it. Interestingly though, what they're saying is really necessity is the mother of all inventions, right? And so we've seen wholesalers who may have had plans around expanding their business into to compete with the food boxes and food bags, leap into that in lockdown. So now there's a whole lot more ways in New Zealand to get meal kits into your home, be it via the traditional HelloFresh, Whoop, My Food Bag, through wholesalers, or even the grocery retailers themselves, where they've created affordable food box to help make shopping easier and simpler through periods like COVID. But we're expecting that behavioural pattern to stick around and consumers to go, actually, that was quite easy. The food bag companies like My Food Bag, Whoop and HelloFresh saw a dramatic increase and actually had to, for a period of time in lockdown, stop new subscriptions and limit their range. So they will have enjoyed a surge in the new baseline as well. And then finally, we're seeing a little bit of social commerce emerge where actually, how do we connect Kiwis with local producers where they can get their local fresh, local products and support local brands? So look, in summary, you know, we are expecting reduced out-of-home consumption to continue. You know, while I've enjoyed going out to a few restaurants recently, it's, you know, highly likely I'm not going to plan to do that too often until I see how the economic situation is going to land here. So it's likely I'm going to spend some more money in the supermarket. We are seeing care and compassion and that community orientation support New Zealand, help our businesses get back on their feet, champion local brands, champion local businesses, and we expect a continued surge in that space. And as I've just said, we do expect e-commerce to be elevated. People are much more comfortable in that space. We always had plenty of early adopters, but now we've got a whole bunch more people who go, actually, this works all right. I'm pretty happy with a courier truck turning up to my house, whether it be with my food or the clothes I've purchased. So we expect that to stay at elevated levels. So look, for the FMCG industry specifically, overall, we'd expect the outlook for 2020 to be pretty positive. That's a broad brush statement. You know, if you're an FMCG business that spans grocery, maybe pharmacy or grocery and out of home, food service, it's going to have slightly different nuances. And food service is definitely going to take a while to get back on its feet, but it's certainly doing that. But generally for FMCG, grocery-oriented business, you are probably going to have a reasonable 2020. The accelerators are more in play than the decelerators. So unemployment, cautious spending all play into more expenditure, as we saw through the financial crisis of 2007 to 2010, lead to more grocery expenditure than the decelerators. They will drive our behaviours. We will have more focus on private label. We'll probably buy more larger economic packs or very small individual packs to manage our cash. But that's the story from us as it is today. So it's been a really interesting journey. It's not the end of the journey, but hopefully in here what you've seen is some interesting insights that in your business, your retail business, your supply and manufacturing business, you can think about, how do I respond to these emerging trends that are now starting to cement themselves? How do I adjust my business, and how do I make the most of the situation we're in? We'd love to open up to questions. Paul, how are we looking?
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, we've got a fair few questions. Firstly, I think thank you to you and Sam. I thought that was really compelling and thought-provoking presentation. And one of the things I think kind of a general observation is, we're not short of data, like many, if not all of the people on this call. But I love the fact that we've looked up from our data sources and looked at things like, Google traffic, and we've looked at mobility data from government data to kind of provide the context to that. So I think that's great that we've done that. I think one of the things I also really enjoy is the sentiment of New Zealand being a team of 5 million Kiwis as well. I think there's a lot of countries that could learn from that, especially my country of origin, the UK. I think hats off to New Zealand, and fingers crossed that the hard work that you've put in as a team is going to pay off. I think listen, the focus on in home is one of the big pickups for me from the presentation today. The role of the home has changed hugely in the last few months and will continue to do so. So I think for all of us, it's thinking, well, okay, how do we now make that in-home, and I'd say in-country experience as well, really easy for consumers to create new experiences, and what's the innovation that we can provide to support that. And I think partnership opportunities, around that as well. Sam mentioned about cooking, how do we replicate cooking classes for the family at home, cinema nights, home salon, pub quizzes. I'm sure a lot of you have used Kahoot as well. So there's lots of technology there to support us on that. And I think, it's probably responsible for all of us that work in the FMCG industry to also, as consumers, support our local communities and local businesses as well. And I think, that's a real focus point. I love the concept of the 3 Ps as well around, wellness for the skin, body and mind. And I think particularly for consumers, understanding their mindset at the moment and how that's going to pan out as an industry. And I think, kind of approaching insights from almost a micro segmentation perspective to really understand what's driving consumers and their mindset and how we can help them. And I think a final point on that is recognizing the fact that we're going to have some extremes of economic pressure as well. So we're going to have, good sized segments of the population that will have reduced household incomes and have lost their jobs. So they're definitely going to be budget spending, private label denotes that versus that need for treats, as Sam mentioned about the ice cream as well. How do we focus on kind of both ends of the sort of consumer mindset when it comes to their budget? And I think final point, because we have got a few questions, is, we all got to keep an eye on the stats around births in December and January, because that could have could be an interesting Christmas in many different ways, but for certain categories that's going to be a big change as well. So as ever, there is opportunity within the economic distress that we're seeing in New Zealand, but in other countries as well. And I think time will tell whether the dreaded second wave is going to impact our colleagues and friends in other markets. Notwithstanding what we're seeing in not just in Victoria in Australia, but Leicester in the UK, you're seeing it across the US as well, these kind of second wave focused outbreaks, which is getting in the way of kind of reigniting the economy. And hopefully we see New Zealand as a great case study for how to avoid that go forward. But let me move to some questions. So we've got a fair few on there. So if I just kick that so, first question is really around, what's how do we excuse me how do we change our approach to innovation, and what are the kind of the key areas that we need to focus on around that in the industry? So I'll open that one out to Sam. If you've talked a bit about that in the presentation, any kind of hints and advice that you can provide to the audience today on that?
I'll just pop into this one. So in terms of innovation, what we've started to see already as we've entered into level 1 is innovation coming back into our stores. So a big kind of blockbuster innovation that's come through is caramel with Hokey Pokey. Caramel milk the last couple of years has been a sensation in New Zealand, so it's nice to see some of that activity come through. But of course, retailers are going to be thinking about, is this innovation going to attract my shoppers who are much more rigidly shopping? Because what we are seeing is that there's much more focus on buying by lists at the moment. So kind of disrupting that path to purchase is a bit of a challenge. The other thing in terms of innovation is, are we talking about these emerging trends and how we can leverage those? Because I think right now the innovation pipeline that companies have are probably based on what happened pre-COVID. So are we reassessing those innovations and really making sure that they're going to attract the new customers that we're seeing? I think ultimately, and we haven't really spoken about this, but if we think about change, there is a lot of change that's going on, but there's also a lot of things that are going to just remain, because our values and principles, they don't actually change that much. So we are going to still be looking for convenient solutions. Sustainability is still going to be there, and a few other things. Craig, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think my build on that would be to look through the lens of some of the slides in this presentation. So people are going to be looking for economy. So there may be innovation just around pack size. It could be a larger pack size, or it could be giving smaller, easier, lower price pack size. Don't get stuck in the middle. Would be the first thing. And then have a look at some of the other things. If we're at home more, we're going to be treating ourselves to the caramel Hokey Pokey, that chocolate that Sam talked about, those sorts of those ice creams. How can you help people have those little restaurant or fun kind of treats at home?
Awesome, thank you guys. I think we really squeeze one more question in there. There are quite a few, so what we will do is we will follow up individually with audience members. But final question. So we've got a question here. Do you anticipate levels of at-home consumption to be significantly lower in New Zealand because the country's normalised? So Craig, do you want to have a bash at that one?
Yeah, I think as we've talked through the presentation, I think we're going through a celebration period at the moment. We've enjoyed a month in lockdown level 1, and we're out and about and celebrating freedom. But as we all know, we haven't hit the real pain yet. We've still got a lot of unemployment to come, and that will restrain consumer spending. So no, we expect our in-home consumption still to stay relatively high. By a global standard, it may be low because we aren't being forced into lockdown like a lot of other countries. But actually, we expect similar trends like the GFC, where people will still spend a little bit less in out of home at restaurants, cafes and bars. Now, they might be at 70, 80% levels like Sam said, but that's a material impact.
Awesome, thank you. I'm conscious we're just about on the hour, so and I've seen we've got some more questions coming in as the guys are answering those two questions that I picked. So as I say, we'll definitely follow up on those very shortly and get back to you. But I'll hand back to Craig just to close off as we come up to the hour.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get through anywhere near the number of questions that are coming in. But as Paul said, we will endeavour to get back to the individuals who've written those questions with answers where we can. But look, again, we feel our role as IRI, we don't have all the answers, all the data sets, but we think it's really important during this time to bring what we have together to help our clients and the broader community make decisions and the right decisions going forward. So hopefully that's been useful today. We'll continue to share our information, whether you partner with us or not. It's important that we play our role, so we're happy to do that. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available shortly, and we will share the deck, as I said, to those that have registered and come on board to the webinar, so you can have that as a leave behind. So thank you for joining us. Sam, thanks for all your hard work today, and Paul, thanks for being part of this New Zealand-based webinar. Bye, folks.
Bye, guys.